Every year, search and rescue teams recover bodies from America's mountains. But the deadliest enemy isn't avalanches or equipment failure, it's stupidity. These aren't freak accidents, but preventable deaths caused by terrible decision-making. Today, we're examining 5 cases where outdoorsmen made fatal mistakes that defy basic common sense. It was June 15, 2017, and the morning air in Glacier National Park hung still and heavy over the remote wilderness. The remote Bowman Creek drainage stretched silent through dense wilderness, its waters running cold over granite stones worn smooth by centuries of snowmelt. Kyle Brennan, a 29-year-old freelance wildlife photographer from Missoula, had built a modest reputation capturing close-range shots of Montana's apex predators for outdoor magazines. Brennan believed in minimal equipment and maximum proximity, deliberately avoiding bear spray because he thought it made photographers careless. This trip was Brennan's most ambitious project yet, documenting grizzly bears during peak berry season when their behavior was most unpredictable. He had secured a backcountry permit for the remote Bowman Creek drainage, an area known for grizzly activity, but rarely visited due to difficult access. On his second day, Brennan located a scarred male feeding on huckleberries near the water's edge, 200 yards downstream. The bear, later estimated at 450 pounds, showed classic dominance behavior: ears forward, head high, deliberately slow movements. Brennan began his approach, moving in 20-yard increments. The bear, focused intensely on feeding, occasionally glanced in his direction, but continued foraging, a behavior Brennan interpreted as tolerance rather than warning. At 40 yards, he achieved the frame he wanted, the massive grizzly standing in dappled sunlight, berry juice staining its muzzle. The bear's head turned directly toward him, eyes locking onto his position. For 30 seconds, neither moved. The attack began without warning. The grizzly exploded from the berry patch with shocking speed, covering the first 20 yards in under 2 seconds. Brennan stumbled backward, his camera strap tangling around his neck as he tried to run. The bear's massive paw struck his back with the force of a sledgehammer, sending him sprawling face first into the rocky stream bed. His camera shattered against the stones as 450 pounds of muscle and fury landed on top of him. The grizzly's jaws clamped down on Brennan's shoulder, crushing the clavicle with an audible crack. Brennan's scream echoed through the drainage as the bear shook him like a rag doll, his body lifting completely off the ground with each violent motion. The animal's canine teeth, each nearly 2 inches long, punctured through his jacket and deep into muscle tissue. Blood sprayed across the creek stones as the bear released him, only to immediately bite down on his left thigh. The femur snapped under 1,200 pounds of pressure, bone fragments tearing through muscle and skin. Brennan's leg bent at an impossible angle as the bear dragged him toward a deeper water. His hands clawed desperately at rocks and roots, fingernails tearing away as he tried to anchor himself. The grizzly's claws raked across his back, 4 parallel gashes opening from shoulder blade to spine, exposing white ribs beneath shredded flesh. For nearly 3 minutes, the mauling continued with methodical brutality. The bear bit repeatedly at Brennan's torso, each attack targeting a different area: ribs, abdomen, arms. His screams gradually weakened to whimpers, then to gurgling sounds as blood filled his throat. The grizzly's final attack focused on his head, massive jaws crushing his skull with a wet grinding a sound that echoed off the canyon walls. 2 backpackers camping a mile downstream heard the initial screams and called park dispatch on a satellite communicator at 4:47 p.m. The first ranger reached the scene via helicopter at 6:15 p.m., 1 hour and 28 minutes later. They found Brennan's body partially submerged in the creek, the grizzly long gone. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as massive trauma from multiple bite wounds, with contributing factors including skull fracture, internal bleeding, and shock. Tissue samples confirmed grizzly bear DNA. Brennan's body was transported to the Flathead County morgue for autopsy before being released to his family 3 days later. It was July 8th, 2017, and the afternoon sky above Mount Evans darkened with towering thunderheads that should have sent every living thing fleeing for shelter. Summit Lake sat like a dark mirror at 12,800 feet, its surface reflecting the ominous clouds building overhead with increasing intensity. Drew Caldwell, a 41-year-old plumber from Colorado Springs, had spent 2 decades chasing native cutthroat trout in Colorado's high country waters. His reputation among local anglers was built on his willingness to fish in conditions that drove others home. Caldwell believed storms made trout more aggressive, and he had never retreated from weather in 20 years of high-altitude fishing. Caldwell had driven 3 hours from Colorado Springs specifically to fish Summit Lake's pristine waters, which he considered the best cutthroat trout habitat in the state. The 2-mile hike to the glacial lake at 12,800 feet had been planned for months, timed to coincide with peak summer fishing when native cutthroat trout were most active. Lightning occurs with deadly frequency above tree line in Colorado, where thin atmosphere provides less protection against electrical discharge, and isolated objects become natural conductors. The state averages 3 to 5 lightning deaths annually, with fishermen representing a disproportionate number due to their tendency to hold long, graphite rods near water during storms. Weather forecasters had issued severe thunderstorm warnings for the Front Range, specifically mentioning Mount Evans as particularly dangerous. Other anglers had packed up by 2 p.m. as thunder began echoing off surrounding peaks. A group of backpackers passed Caldwell on their descent, shouting warnings about the approaching storm and pointing to the towering anvil clouds building westward. The hair on Caldwell's arm stood up, a clear warning of electrical buildup, but he dismissed it as static from his synthetic vest. By 3:30 p.m., the storm moved directly overhead. Thunder crashed with deafening intensity, and lightning strikes became visible every few seconds. The air crackled with energy that made metal objects hum. Caldwell's 9-foot graphite rod, extended high during casting, had become a lightning rod in one of Earth's most electrically active environments. The strike occurred at 3:47 p.m. as Caldwell executed a cast toward rising fish 40 feet from shore. Lightning followed the path down his graphite rod, sending thousands of amperes through his body and into the ground via his metal-cleated boots. The current stopped his heart instantly, every muscle contracting with such force that his spine compressed and vertebrae cracked. The electrical discharge superheated moisture in his clothing, creating steam that rose from his body. The lightning's entry point was his right hand gripping the rod's cork handle. The current burned through his palm, leaving a charred crater where flesh vaporized. It traveled up his arm, following nerve pathways, cooking tissue from inside out. His synthetic vest melted against his chest, molten plastic fusing with burned skin. The electricity exited through his feet, blowing apart his boots and leaving his soles blackened and smoking. Caldwell collapsed where he stood, falling backward into shallow water with a splash that sent steam rising where superheated flesh met cold lake water. His fishing rod, now twisted carbon fiber and metal, remained fused to his carbonized palm. The smell of burned protein and melted synthetics filled the air. His hair had been singed away, leaving his scalp blistered and raw. For several minutes, his body floated face down in the shallows, electrical burns covering 40% of his skin. Second and third degree burns marked the lightning's path from hand to feet, with severe damage at entry and exit points. His nervous system, destroyed by the electrical surge, had ceased all function. 2 hikers descending from the summit witnessed the lightning strike and called 911 on a satellite communicator at 3:52 p.m. Flight for Life crews were grounded due to the ongoing storm and high altitude limitations, forcing ground rescue teams to hike from the Mount Evans road. Paramedics reached Summit Lake at 6:25 p.m., 2 hours and 33 minutes later. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest due to lightning strike, with contributing factors including severe electrical burns and neurological trauma. The fishing rod, melted and fused to his hand, required surgical removal during examination. The investigation ruled accidental death due to natural causes. It was September 19th, 2015, and the morning light cast long shadows across Devil's Tower's vertical walls, illuminating the ancient volcanic neck that rose 867 feet from the Wyoming prairie. The tower's distinctive columns stretched skyward, their surfaces scarred by countless seasons that had created the cracks and fissures climbers relied upon. Ridge Hawkins, a 29-year-old construction worker from Casper, had spent 3 years climbing on Wyoming's easier crags and believed his weekend experience had prepared him for Devil's Tower's classic routes. His logbook revealed he had never led anything above 5.7 grade or climbed traditional routes requiring gear placement skills. Ridge dismissed advice about partnering up, insisting he could handle the Durance route solo. Ridge had chosen the Durance route specifically because it was Devil's Tower's most famous climb, a 5.7 traditional route requiring placing removable protection in natural rock features along the tower's 400-foot climbable face. Devil's Tower's rock contains sections of fractured stone and flaring cracks that can reject poorly placed gear under load. Other climbers in the parking area noticed Ridge's minimal rack of protection gear and suggested he reconsider the solo attempt. A pair of experienced climbers offered to let him join their rope team, but Ridge declined, claiming he preferred to climb at his own pace. Ridge began his ascent at 2 p.m. despite having only 3 hours of daylight remaining. He moved quickly through the lower pitches, placing minimal protection and skipping recommended belay stances. His construction background had given him confidence working at height, but placing gear in natural rock cracks differed significantly from building scaffolding. At 150 feet above the ground, Ridge encountered a difficult section where the crack flared outward, making secure gear placement nearly impossible. He forced a cam into the widening fissure, failing to recognize that the placement would only hold body weight, not the dynamic forces of a climbing fall. The cam's lobes barely contacted the rock, held in place more by friction than mechanical advantage. Ridge committed to a challenging move above his questionable protection, reaching for a distant handhold while his feet smeared against smooth rock. His right foot slipped, and he fell backward into space. The poorly placed cam ripped from the crack immediately as Ridge plummeted 40 feet down the vertical wall. His body struck a ledge with devastating force, ribs cracking as the impact drove bone fragments into his right lung. The lung collapsed instantly, filling his chest cavity with blood and making each breath a desperate struggle. Ridge gasped for air that wouldn't come, blood frothing from his mouth. His climbing rope, running over a sharp edge above, began sawing through under his weight as individual nylon fibers snapped. The rope failed completely, sending Ridge into a second fall of 110 feet to the talus slope below. He struck the boulder field with his spine compressed, the impact severing his spinal cord at the lumbar region and instantly paralyzing his legs. His femurs protruded through torn flesh, where the bones had snapped on impact. Ridge lay twisted among the rocks, unable to move his lower body, choking on blood as internal bleeding filled his abdominal cavity. For nearly 20 minutes, Ridge remained conscious but paralyzed, his breathing becoming increasingly labored as blood loss and shock took hold. His attempts to reach the radio clipped to his harness failed as his hands grew numb. The afternoon sun beat down on the exposed talus, and his body temperature began dropping. Climbers on an adjacent route witnessed the fall and immediately called for rescue at 3:15 p.m. The technical rescue team reached the base of the tower at 5:30 p.m. 2 hours and 15 minutes later, they found Ridge unconscious with barely detectable pulse. An autopsy determined death resulted from multiple traumatic injuries, including spinal severance and massive internal hemorrhaging. The climbing accident was classified as equipment failure due to improper gear placement. Ridge's climbing gear was donated to a local climbing organization, while his family held a small service at a Casper funeral home 3 days later. It was November 2nd, 2014, and the late afternoon sky above Mount Rainier hung heavy with the kind of gray clouds that promised an early and brutal winter storm. The Ptolemy Peak Trail wound through dense forest, before emerging onto exposed ridges where November weather could turn lethal within minutes. Finn Larsens, a 38-year-old accountant from Tacoma, had spent most weekends hiking local trails, but had never experienced true mountain weather. His office fitness routine and occasional day hikes on groomed paths had given him confidence that didn't match his actual outdoor experience. Finn believed that staying in shape meant he could handle any trail, regardless of conditions or season. Finn had decided to tackle Tolmi Peak in November, to challenge himself beyond his usual summer hiking routine. Mount Rainier's weather is notoriously unpredictable, with temperatures that can drop rapidly and sudden storms that bring heavy snow even in early winter. At nearly 5,000 feet elevation, the trail crosses exposed terrain where hypothermia can develop quickly. Park rangers at the Paradise entrance had warned Finn about incoming weather and strongly recommended postponing his hike. The forecast called for temperatures dropping near freezing with possible whiteout conditions after 4 p.m. Other hikers in the parking area were packing up and heading home, citing the deteriorating conditions and shortened daylight hours. Finn started his hike at 2 p.m. wearing cotton jeans, a cotton hoodie, and running shoes, clothing that would become deadly once wet. He carried only a water bottle and energy bar, dismissing ranger suggestions about emergency gear as unnecessary for a simple day hike. The 4:30 p.m. sunset gave him barely 2.5 hours of daylight. At 4,800 feet elevation, Finn was caught in a sudden whiteout as temperatures plummeted and snow began falling steadily. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet, and he quickly became disoriented, leaving the marked trail and wandering in circles. His cotton clothing, soaked with sweat from the climb, began freezing against his skin as the temperature dropped below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Severe hypothermia set in as Finn's core temperature dropped below 90 degrees Fahrenheit. His body began shutting down non-essential functions to preserve vital organs. Violent shivering gave way to the paradoxical undressing common in severe hypothermia. His confused brain convinced him he was overheating. He removed his hoodie and stumbled through knee-deep snow in just a t-shirt. Finn's speech became slurred, then stopped entirely as his brain function deteriorated. He stumbled into a hidden creek, soaking his shoes and socks completely. His feet began freezing immediately, toes turning black with frostbite. Delirium set in as he hallucinated about being in a warm office building, sitting down in the snow as if it were a comfortable chair. His heart rate slowed dramatically as his cardiovascular system struggled to pump blood through constricted vessels. Finn curled into a fetal position as his body entered the final stages of hypothermia, his breathing becoming shallow and irregular, before stopping entirely after nearly 5 hours of exposure. Snow continued falling through the night, gradually covering Finn's body under 10 inches of powder. His cotton clothing had frozen solid, crackling in the sub-zero temperatures. The storm continued through the night, erasing any trace of his footprints and making search efforts impossible until morning. Park rangers began searching when Finn's car remained in the parking lot overnight. Using Avalanche probes, they located his body at 8 a.m. the following morning, partially buried in snow just 200 yards from the main trail. His body temperature had equalized with the surrounding snow. The medical examiner determined that death occurred from severe hypothermia, with contributing factors of exposure and dehydration. Finn's body showed classic signs of paradoxical undressing and terminal burrowing behavior. The case was documented as an accidental death due to inadequate preparation, and park officials added his case to their winter safety database for future reference. It was February 14th, 2013, and the morning sky above the Teton backcountry hung clear and deceptively calm, masking the deadly instability building in the snowpack beneath. The backcountry stretched endlessly white across steep north-facing slopes where wind-loaded snow had accumulated into massive slabs waiting for the slightest trigger. Knox Sterling, a 32-year-old ski instructor from Jackson, had spent 5 years teaching on groomed resort runs and believed his expert skiing skills translated directly to backcountry terrain. His instructor certification and ability to handle double black diamond runs had given him confidence that didn't match his complete lack of avalanche education. Knox openly mocked avalanche safety courses as paranoid nonsense designed to sell expensive gear to weekend warriors. Knox had planned this backcountry trip to escape the crowded resort slopes and experience untouched powder in the Teton wilderness. He viewed backcountry skiing as simply resort skiing without lift lines, failing to understand the fundamental differences in terrain assessment and risk management. The Teton backcountry is notorious for its avalanche danger, with steep terrain, heavy snowfall, and wind patterns that create unstable conditions throughout winter. Avalanche danger that day was rated high by the local Avalanche Center, meaning natural and human-triggered slides were likely. Ski Patrol at Jackson Hole had posted warnings about recent wind loading and unstable snow conditions on north-facing slopes above 9,000 feet. Other backcountry skiers in the parking area were discussing safer alternatives or postponing their trips entirely. Knox dismissed their concerns, claiming that his skiing ability would allow him to outrun any slide that might occur. Knox began his ascent at 10 a.m., carrying no avalanche safety equipment, no beacon, probe, or shovel. He had deliberately chosen a steep north-facing slope loaded with wind-blown snow because it offered the deep powder skiing he craved. The slope angle exceeded 35 degrees, well within the prime avalanche zone where most deadly slides occur. At 9,800 feet elevation, Knox began his descent during peak heating hours when solar radiation destabilizes snow layers. His first aggressive turn sent stress fractures shooting through the snowpack. The wind-loaded slab, already under tension from recent storms, propagated the fracture line instantly across a 300-foot width. The avalanche released with a thunderous crack as a 6-foot wall of snow broke loose and accelerated rapidly down the slope. Knox attempted to ski out of the slide path, but the debris caught him within seconds, traveling at 60 miles per hour and growing in volume as it entrained more snow. The churning mass tumbled him violently, filling his mouth and nose with snow as he cartwheeled helplessly downslope. His ski bindings failed to release under the chaotic forces, twisting his legs until both tibia snapped with audible cracks. The avalanche stripped off his jacket and goggles as it carried him 800 feet down the mountain. Knox disappeared beneath the surface, buried under 12 feet of concrete-hard debris that set like cement once the slide stopped. Trapped in complete darkness, Knox couldn't move his arms to dig upward. The immense weight of compacted snow compressed his chest, making breathing nearly impossible. His broken legs were twisted at grotesque angles, but the cold quickly numbed the pain. Each breath became a struggle as carbon dioxide built up in the small air pocket around his face. Knox's muffled screams went unheard beneath tons of snow. Panic set in as he realized the hopelessness of his situation. His breathing became rapid and shallow, quickly depleting the limited oxygen in his snow cave. After 8 minutes of desperate struggle, suffocation claimed him as his air supply ran out completely. Skiers in an adjacent drainage heard the avalanche, called search and rescue at 11:45 a.m. Probe teams reached the debris field at 2:30 p.m., nearly 3 hours later. Using avalanche probes, they systematically searched the compacted snow for any sign of Knox's body. Rescuers located Knox's body after 6 hours of probing, buried 12 feet deep in the center of the debris field. His skis were found 200 feet away, torn from his boots by the avalanche's force. The probe team noted that the snow had set so hard it required shovels and ice axes to excavate his body. The autopsy revealed death by suffocation from snow inhalation, compounded by severe trauma to both legs and exposure-related injuries. Investigators determined the fatality resulted from entering high-risk terrain without proper equipment or training. Knox's family arranged for a private burial in his hometown, and his ski equipment was returned to the resort where he had worked. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here